Well, this Thursday, of course, is Thanksgiving, and I want to begin this morning by thanking our church members, Leith Letcher and Jim Shewell, for this really beautiful Advent display that's on our altar. Leith and Jim do this for us every year, and it is so beautiful, and to me it's just such a powerful reminder of God's great abundance and plenty for all of us. So thank you, Leith and Jim. If you were with us last month, you know that I was talking with you about the power of gratitude. And I encouraged each and every one of us at that time to take on a 30-day gratitude challenge, which has now come to an end. But I am so pleased that so many of you took that challenge, and you told me that you have been incorporating gratitude practices into your daily life, and that you're already reaping the benefits of those practices. I'm so grateful to hear that, and I'm so grateful for all of you. We, each and every Sunday here, we are giving thanks. That's why we gather together. So yes, today we are celebrating Thanksgiving Sunday, but as I mentioned at the top of the service, we're also celebrating another feast day that's on the church calendar today. Now, I think many of you know we follow the church calendar, which is a very old calendar. It dates all the way back to 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea. So it's almost 1,700 years old. But this calendar, which is followed by most churches around the world, sets the dates for Advent and Christmas and Lent and Easter and for various feast days. Days like Pentecost and Palm Sunday and Epiphany. And as I mentioned at the top of the service, today is a feast day. It's called the Feast Day of Christ the King. Some churches call it Reign of Christ Sunday. And this falls on the last Sunday right before Advent. But as we heard in our words of integration and guidance this morning, this is a relatively new feast day on the church calendar. It is less than 100 years old. As we heard in those words, it was established around the time of World War I. During a time of great upheaval and discord and turmoil around the world. The year was 1925 when the church established Christ the King Sunday. And if you know your history, you know it was around the time that people like Mussolini and Stalin and Hitler were coming to power. It was a time of dictatorships and authoritarianism, a time where we saw the rise of ideologies like communism, nationalism, fascism, Nazism. So what the church wanted to do was establish a feast day to remind believers around the world that there is only one power, and that is the power of the Christ. And when they set that feast day, it was a challenge to modern political leaders who value power over peace, power over justice, and power over truth. And that's why we celebrate it every year. This year, of course, in 2019, it again holds great meaning for us because of the political turmoil that we are facing in our nation, and also because we are seeing once again the rise of nationalism and fascism in our nation and in the world. Now, Jesus, of course, came as the Prince of Peace. He wanted to establish a new kingdom, a world that would be ruled by love, a world where justice and truth would reign supreme. He said that he wanted us to create a new world order, a world where the last would be first, a world where the least of these would be considered the most important, a world where those who were oppressed and lowly would be lifted up high. Now that is not how kingdoms are established. If we look at the history of the establishment of kingdoms in humankind, kingdoms get established by wealth and power and control and dominion and oppression. Jesus was trying to establish a different kind of kingdom because, as I mentioned, he was a different kind of king. Now, as we heard in our gospel reading today from Luke's gospel, Jesus once again is asked, "Are you not the king?" And Jesus doesn't answer. In fact, if you look throughout the gospels, whenever Jesus is asked that question, he resists it. He never answers it. Jesus did not want to be considered a king. And that's why I wonder what he would think about today, about how Christians all over the world are celebrating him as king. And I wonder what he would think of those great works of art that some of the world's greatest artists have painted of Jesus as a king, with a gold crown, sitting on a majestic throne, and holding in his hand a bejeweled scepter. I don't see Jesus that way. Because when I think of a king, I think of someone who's wealthy and majestic, who lives off in a golden palace, so far removed from people, so out of touch with people. I think of someone who has lots of servants and yes men at his beck and call, who will do everything they can to make sure that the king maintains his power. That wasn't Jesus. That was the exact opposite of who Jesus was. Last year at this time, we were so fortunate to have the Christian writer John Pavlovitz visit us here at Douglas UCC. He gave the message last year around this time. And he said that most Christians today would not even recognize Jesus if he was here today. Wouldn't even recognize him. And he said because Jesus was a poor refugee, that Jesus was a dark-skinned Middle Eastern man. He said that Jesus was a heretic, a radical, a revolutionary, someone who challenged the political and religious establishments of his day, and someone who led a movement of the marginalized and the oppressed. And in one of his recent blog posts, John Pavlovitz said this: Jesus was a progressive. He started a revolutionary underground movement. His message wasn't a return to family values or the promise of making Palestine great again. Jesus championed the poor, and he opposed the powerful. He freely gave food to the hungry and care to the sick. He welcomed women in ministry, and he treated them as equals. He decried personal and systemic violence. He condemned the hoarding of wealth, and he was an activist for the common good. That doesn't sound like a king to me. But as I mentioned, Jesus was a different kind of king, and he wanted to establish not really a kingdom in the worldly sense. He wanted to establish a kingdom, a world where all people are kin, where we see the oneness in everyone. So if you and I truly declare that we are Christians, that we are followers of his way, then we have to continue to be about that work of building the kingdom, in lifting up the lowly and the poor, in speaking truth to the powers that be. Our call as Christians is to continue that work of creating a just world for all, a world where love rules, and where peace and justice and truth reigns supreme. That's our Christian call. Now, Jesus is a king, but today we are not having his coronation, if you will. I think Jesus would hate that. Jesus didn't want to be a king. And so for us to put a crown on his head today and celebrate him as king, I think is something he would resist, as he did throughout his lifetime. What we're celebrating today isn't Jesus as king. We're celebrating the reign of Christ. Now, I've told you before, Christ existed billions of years before Jesus of Nazareth was even born. We heard about that in our first reading today from Colossians. It said that Christ is the firstborn of all creation, which means before anything else was created, there was the Christ. That's what we're celebrating today, is that Christ light. And we're reminding ourselves today on Christ the King Sunday that that is the only true power, that power of love. So may that love rule in our hearts, and may peace and justice and truth reign in our land. Namaste.